Welcome, friends, to another episode of the Pick Six podcast. I am your host, DPZ, and with me, I've got my good friend Drake. And today we're going to be talking about the National. I did not go to the National, but Drake did. So the good news is he can fill us in for those of us who did not attend on what his experience was like. I know there's a lot of content out there talking about the National and other people's experiences, but the beautiful thing about talking about the National, from what I can understand and from what I've learned, is that everybody's experience is a bit different. So, some people come home with a card that they've always wanted. Someone had a Target card they were looking for and they were able to acquire it. And then some folks just go there and all of a sudden they're surprised by something that happened. And then some folks have a very, unfortunate experience there, and then they share that. So it's just different for everybody, I feel like. Other than it sounds like everybody getting sick, I think that it's going to be a different experience for everyone. So I'm excited, Drake, to hear about your experience. But before we do that, before we launch into that, you had some questions from our friends out there that they had a question for us, or a couple questions for us. Let's leave with that before we dive in.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm excited to talk about the National. It's great to be back on with you again. Thanks again to all the folks that posted in their comments in our episode last week and the King Griffey Jr. versus Barry Bonds debate, and which card would they rather have, and all that. It was kind of split. I think it was maybe more Bonds than Griffey, but appreciate the engagement from all the folks. So, So thank you. Absolutely. But the question that came in actually from Instagram from @BigCza. He said, "What's your favorite memory as a collector?" So what do you say, DPZ?
My favorite memory as a collector. I loved going to gas stations and getting packs of 89 Donruss. I still vividly remember going into the certain gas stations in my hometown and picking out those packs of cards. I mean, little did we know that they printed so many of them, but just the different colors. And I remember sitting in my parents' car, opening them up and thumbing through the cards. And that smell of like Topps cards when you open those packs. There's a distinct aroma that those cards had that was very pleasant and it was just kind of exciting. I loved going over to my friend's house and trading cards. We all obviously were in love with Mark McGwire and Jose Canseco and Barry Bonds and Ken Griffey Jr. Those are the guys that we all just loved. And of course, as you kind of expand on, Cal Ripken and Don Mattingly, and you keep going. But yeah, I mean, just the excitement of opening those cards. Those packs, chasing the 1987 Fleer Michael Jordan card. For some reason, the 86 never really registered for me when I was younger. The 87 did. Maybe that's why I like that set so much, because we all wanted to get those cards. That's probably my most fond memory, is like the opening of packs, buying them from the store and then opening them up at home with friends or just in the car on the ride home.
Yep, same here. Yeah. I mean, same. It was great to, you'd spend the night at a friend's house on Friday night, and their parents would take you to the hobby shop, and you would, you'd get a box of cards and rip them, and you'd get excited over you'd get the hottest player of the week, and then you'd trade with your friends and that whole sort of thing, and just that whole experience was a lot of fun. But I'd probably say my favorite memory. If I can go back, and I think I've shared this at some point before, but one of my jobs in high school, I worked at a retail sports shop, and the name of it was called Fanatics, which is not like Fanatics. It was like Fan Addicts. It was FANADDIX, and it was supposed to be like Fan Addicts, but
instead of
X versus CTS. And so I worked there, and the guy who owned it, Dean, he sold hats and polos and shirts and decals and license plate frames and that whole sort of thing. But he also had a sports card area, and that's what I gravitated to. That's why I wanted to work in the shop, because I got to work around cards and that whole sort of thing. And if you'll remember back in the 90s, when all the packs had the pack odds, and you would look on the back and it would say, this is 1 in 24 packs, or this is 1 in 48. And you were trying to get those ones that had the long odds. And so Ricky Williams was a rookie in 1999. And he had gotten a box there. It was the 1999 Tops, and I just got one pack of cards because that's what I would do sometimes. Like he would pay me, and I would buy a pack of cards or a couple packs of cards or whatever. And I remember I got this one pack of cards of the 99 just base Tops, and I'm opening it up and I'm looking, and the card was flipped around backwards, so I knew it was something special, and I pulled it out, and it was a Topps Ricky Williams rookie auto card. And I was like, this is amazing, right? And so I remember flipping on the back of the pack and looking for it, and it said rookie autographs, and I think it was like had the numbers or something like that, but I'll never forget, it said 1 in 18,372 packs. And so that to me was just really cool just to think about, what I was 16 at the time, and just thinking about how long odds were to get that card. And Ricky Williams was such a hot rookie back then. And I just remember being so excited to pull that card. And that for me is a great memory. And that was a card I actually kept for a very long time. And later I sold that card on eBay, probably like way past Ricky Williams' peak and that whole sort of thing. But it's kind of one looking back I wish I had kept just from like the nostalgia aspect for it. But I think I remember looking and seeing what it was selling for at the time and remembering that I could use that $500 because I think I was in college. And so yes, that's a great memory for me as a collector.
Cool. Very cool. Very cool. Any other questions, or we want to jump right into National?
Man, that was really it. I mean, most everything else was around, the acquisition story, my credentials, and National and all that kind of stuff. So I'm excited to share kind of all things National.
Let's do it. So why don't you start us off? Walk us through your experience. What was it like day by day, and then we'll wrap with your acquisition story, because obviously you went there, you were able to acquire that card. Did you acquire that card at the National, or did you acquire that card via someone who wasn't at the National, but it happened there?
Yep. So I actually got that card at the National, and we'll kind of talk more through that with me. And I've got it here, and we'll talk about it too. And I was able to get a couple more cards before I knew this card was even available. So I'll speak to those as well. But yeah, so left out Wednesday morning with actually a friend of mine, Dustin College, who came with me. It was his first card show, and so I figured what better way to take somebody to their first card show than take them to the National. And so we hop on the flight, went from Arkansas to Dallas, and then Dallas to Cleveland. Our flight was delayed a little bit, and so we got in a little bit later than I thought. But I knew that lines would be long on Thursday morning, and we both had the VIP passes. And so we get off the plane, and so I'd never been to the Cleveland airport before, and it's not that nice, number one. But then number two, to get to the rental car area, you have to go it felt like 2 miles offsite. It was like a 10 to 15 minute bus ride. It took forever to get to the rental car thing. And I'm looking at my watch, and I knew they would be there till about 8 p.m. on that kind of preview night, Wednesday night, handing out the badges. And so we finally get in the rental car, and I just fly over to the IX Center. And we walked in the door at like 7:57 and walked down, and they were packing up their stuff. And I was like, please give us our VIP badge. And so we grabbed that, and, that was pretty much that. And then that Wednesday night, I was invited by Dave Marino. I think a lot of people know him. They were having, I think it was the eBay, it was the kickoff event down at Morton Steakhouse in downtown Cleveland. So we ran to the hotel, changed clothes real quick, went down there. And it was a great event. Like Dave and the group that he works with, they always put on just phenomenal events. Dave was helping to organize all the trade nights. Like he's like the party event planner for around the National. And for the ability to go there, it was kind of it was an invite only event, and to get, drinks on the house, and they had a prime rib carving station and all kinds of just phenomenal food. It was a great way to start the week. And so Thursday, left out Thursday, headed to the National, and then that's, as others have talked about, the traffic was a bear. But before we left, getting ready to walk out and look over, and there's Lawrence Taylor sitting there smoking a cigar at like 9 a.m. in the morning, and I was like, well, that's kind of cool. And so it was kind of a funny story. We walked over there, and he was just looking down at his phone and didn't really see us walk up, and I just thought, well, I need to just be respectful, and so I said, Mr. Taylor. And he looked up, and his eyes got real big, and it felt really awkward all of a sudden. And it was almost like he had a look to him like, do these guys want something? Like, what's going on? And so then I shared, hey, big fan of yours when you played. We're here for this sports card convention. Talked to him a little bit, that sort of thing. He was actually a nice guy, and he loosened up and that sort of thing. And so we grabbed a picture, and I sent it to my wife's family on her side. And my mother-in-law responds back with a Google article that said, like, a few days prior, that Lawrence Taylor was like arrested for violating his parole or something like that, related to some kind of, I don't know, something with children or whatever. And so it made me feel a little bit slimy, but it also explained more why when I walked up and I said, Mr. Taylor, and he looked up and was kind of a little jittery. I guess that explains that a little bit better. But, you're
not a small guy walking up to him. You're actually
no. Yeah,
so you walk up to him, he's like, holy crap.
So that was kind of a funny way to kick off the day. But, we went there and the traffic was bad, but fortunately kind of found a way and figured out pretty quick if you went around to the back side of the center and went that way, you could avoid quite a bit of the traffic. So that was a quick learning. And then just walked in and, immediately just, walked around. I went over to the Fanatics Vault, Fanatics Collect, which used to be PWCC. I got some cards from my vault, started seeing people, but it was more just, the day was just walking around and having a really fun time. And then that night we ate at Bonefish Grill, which is always good. And then at our hotel that night was the Peyton Manning, Tom Brady group meetup. And so got to hang out with a bunch of fellow Tom Brady and Manning collectors and that sort of thing, and which was a lot of fun. And then let's see, that night was also when I ran into Chauncey Billups. And so that was neat to see him in person and that sort of thing. And so just to finish out the national stuff, and then we'll go back to the card and acquisition. But Friday was more of the same. Again, just going around, meeting people. Got to see Jerry the King Lawler, which was always good. His first wife and my mom are good friends, so I was able to talk to him. It had been a while since I had seen him, and certainly he's since he's had his stroke, he doesn't have the same pizzazz or whatever that you used to and charisma, but he's still the same king. And so it was great to see him and just explore the sights and sounds and everything of the National. And so Friday night was the big wrestling, the main event 2 wrestling trade night, and all the trade nights occurred kind of in the bottom of the convention center. And so went down there, spent some time there with some fellow wrestling collectors and things like that. And then we went back to the hotel and we're hanging out at the bar, and that's when Michael Vick showed up. And Michael Vick, he certainly had his share of legal troubles as well too, but guy was super friendly, really, really good guy just to chat with and talk to and that sort of thing. So just had a great time with that. Then Saturday was, kind of finishing things up. And by then, you're carrying around your backpack with not only your cards, but your toiletries and some of your stuff. And it weighs 60 pounds on your back. And, you're just ready to wrap things up. So we headed back to the airport about 3 p.m. and grabbed some flights home and got home just before midnight. And it was a great event. It was great to see lots of fans of the show, lots of hobby friends, that whole sort of thing. So I had a lot of fun just at the National. And like I said, there's other people that, talk about, the food lines being long and bathroom lines, and the IX Center couldn't hold enough people and, that whole sort of thing. But there's no sense in, I guess, rehashing that and really getting into like the negative stuff. But for me, the experience as a whole was very positive. So, yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. I mean, that was a very positive experience, it sounds like. Your picture with Michael Vick looks like he was not really wanting to take that picture, but it sounds like he was still more pleasant in person. So I'm glad to hear that it wasn't, a hindrance to him the whole time.
Yeah, I what's funny is I got a lot of comments to that picture, and I joked with them. I said, well, what would you what my response was what would you expect when I walked up to him and I said, "What's up, dog?" And I told him I was a Saints fan. I mean, what more would you expect other than a reaction like that? So.
Very cool, man. You got some cool pictures. You met some cool people. Yeah, very interesting stuff. So let's talk about that Peyton. That EC Essential Credentials, 98 Essential Credentials is, I feel like, one of the most popular 90s sets across all sports, or across football, baseball, and basketball. It's a set that is near and dear to my heart. I have the Griffey PSA 9 myself. It's one of my like cornerstone cards, and there's the futures and there's the nows. Nows are obviously incredibly rare, very much sought after, but the futures are somewhat attainable to a degree, depending on the player. But I think the bigger players, they really command a lot of money. So for you to land a card like that, talk to me, everyone, about how high on the list of like importance was this card for you to obtain?
Yeah. So first of all, I'll share a picture of the card right here. Here's a picture of the card. I think a lot of people have seen it. It's got the acetate background. You can kind of see through the back. You can see my thumb kind of here, and that sort of thing. It's a PSA 9. Obviously everybody has a different serial number. This is numbered out of 7 here, and so there's 61 players in the football set, and so he's card number 54. So his credentials now is numbered out of 54, and so his credentials future is numbered out of 7. And so
it's like a flip flop for football. Yep. It's flip flopped. So the future is the one you want because it's a lower numbered card. Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Yep. Exactly. And so that card was number 1 on my Peyton want list, even beyond other like one of ones and things like that. And it's an interesting thing that I've had some conversations with people about is like, as collectors, which cards are more coveted? Is it like one of ones, or is it, a card out of 7 or out of 10 or things like that? And I think the case could be made for both. And as I've mentioned before, I love my collection to be extremely unique. So I, very much love one of ones and things like that. But it's also really cool if you can be like in a small exclusive club with just a few other people that own a copy of that card. And so I think that's pretty cool too. So yeah, but in terms of the story, right? I said it's number 1 on my want list. So there's 7 copies of the card. I knew where 4 copies existed prior to the show. Spinatron has 2 of them. Waldorf Stories Grant has a copy, and then John Burleson, who goes by Spur Fan at Tech, had a copy. And John is who I was able to get this copy from. And I've known John for 3 years now, and I've asked him constantly about that card. And he said, it's not available. It's never available. I love the 90s. It's my best Peyton card. I don't want it. So Thursday morning, I wake up, kind of after night 1 and that sort of thing. I wake up and I grab my phone and I look at Instagram. I had 5 direct messages from people that had John's story post saying he's headed to the National and he's bringing these cards with me. And he had a whole bunch of cards that he was bringing with him. And it was interesting because I had asked him on Monday a week ago, I said, hey, any chance you'd bring the Credentials Future with you? And he said, nope, that one's staying put. And I had asked Grant, hey, is that any chance you bring your Credentials Future with you? Nope, it's staying at home. So I knew that wasn't even on the radar, and that sort of thing. But as soon as I saw that John was bringing the Credentials as well as a bunch of other cards, I thought, well, hey, let's reach out. It's worth a shot. And so I reached out to John and I said, hey, you're bringing this? And he said, yeah, I want to get it in one of the new PSA holders because I like the way they feel and look, and they're more substantial and that sort of thing. I know you can't feel and look, but these things feel really sturdy.
Oh, yeah.
Some of the old PSA slabs feel like if you drop them, they'd break in half. But these things feel really strong and sturdy. And so he said, for whatever reason, whenever I bring cards to the National, they kind of become available a little bit. And I'm like, no, really? Okay. And so I said, well, what's your ask on it? What's your price on it? And he gave me the number, and it was a massive number, but it was less than any number that I had been given before by Spinatron or from Grant. And so I knew that if I was going to have a shot at one of these, other than one just being pulled out of the box someday or something like that, I knew that, this card only gets more expensive every time it sells. It's one of those. I knew that now was kind of my shot. And so I said, well, let me try to figure some things out. I said, I tentatively want it, so don't go selling it to somebody else without coming back to me first. And he said, sure, absolutely, and that sort of thing. And so at that point, I started thinking about what I had in my collection, and I talked to Nick, the Wharf Sports Cards, about his new card funding option and kind of got more information about how that would work. And he explained that to me and that sort of thing. But where the deal kind of gets interesting is before the National, I had made a deal with Steve Pock, who goes by Diamond Card Collector on Instagram. And he loves wrestling cards. He's got phenomenal wrestling cards, and I thought for the longest time I had a really great modern wrestling collection, and his just blows mine out of the water. His Tom Brady collection blows any other Tom Brady collection out of the water. He's just got the best of the best. And he had been on me for a bunch of wrestling cards for a while. And I told him, hey, the only way I would let these things go would be for some of your Manning Masterpiece cards, your rookie Masterpiece cards, which are the 101s. And so one day, I'm not really sure if he caught me in a weak moment or I caught him in a weak moment or what the deal was, but he agreed to me trading him a bunch of wrestling cards for the Peyton Manning Ultra Series 1 and Series 2 Masterpiece rookie cards and some cash. And so we exchanged that deal in person at the National, and I gave him the wrestling cards and he gave me those. And I had in my mind, like, I'm never moving these cards. These are the pinnacle of my collection. But then, like I said, this was before I knew the Credentials Future was available. And so as soon as I knew the Future was available and I knew about what the value was of those masterpieces, I was like, I've got to jump. These masterpieces are gorgeous cards. They're beautiful. They're top of the mountain cards for Peyton collectors. But to me, the Credentials Future is a card that I wanted more for my collection. And so when I talked to Nick and he explained the card funding, I said, well, what about if I, use these two masterpieces to help, fund that? He said, absolutely. I said, well, what do you think they're worth? And he told me, and I said, well, this would make up, about 80% of the purchase price of the card. So it would be dumb for me not to do that because I've got enough other equity in my collection that I can use the rest of that to pay for the balance of the card. And so we figured that out, and he agreed to it. And obviously, because I know Nick and I have a relationship with Nick, and know John and that whole sort of thing, Nick was able to wire him the money, and John was comfortable, letting me have the card and that sort of thing. And I've of course, turned in a bunch of cards for consignment at Fanatics Collect at the National, and then as soon as I got home, I was able to package up a bunch of other cards and send those to Fanatics Collect, and those will be hitting the weekly auctions here very, very soon. So that's how I paid for the card. And the card funding thing is a relatively newer thing in the hobby, but it's certainly, when you're not just sitting there flush with cash and, that something comes available. And John actually told me, and I ended up finding out who some others were. There was some very serious interest at his asking price. And if I hadn't gotten that card, somebody else would have. In fact, I was talking to the guy just this morning who said he was very interested and would have gotten it if I had not gotten it. So there's certainly demand there. It was a heck of a lot of money, and I'm glad I had the option of card funding through Nick. And I'm also glad that I had the enough equity in my collection that I didn't have to come out of pocket cash. And then the last thing that I'll say too, before we have some further discussion, is I don't think I would have had that possibility to get into this Credentials had it not been for the original trade with Steve, because I don't think that I could have gone from that group of wrestling cards and straight into the Credentials. So those two Ultra Masterpieces were kind of what I guess were the conduit, so to speak, to get me to the Credentials. So I think that's a good piece of advice to think of as collectors is if you're able to trade into something that maybe is not exactly what you want, or maybe it's what you want, but you're not just like feeling just awesome about it or whatever. Just look at it as, well, maybe this is my conduit to get into something better or something that I want more. And I think if you look at it like that, it certainly, it helps you feel super positive about the situation. So, so that's kind of the story. Again, lots of incredible cards will be hitting auction soon. So, if you're looking for some sweet Peyton Manning, Drew Brees, wrestling cards, all that stuff, certainly keep an eye on the upcoming Fanatics Collect auctions.
Very cool. That's a really cool story, and it's kind of the epitome of our hobby. Is we collect cards. We have the best intentions of keeping some of these, but then when a card comes available that you really, really want, from a set you really, really want, then you sometimes just have to make decisions. I just sealed the deal this morning for a very, 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 very big card. I'm going to have to probably move 2 or 3 cards that I do not want to move, and I don't have many left. I have like 13, 14 slabs, bigger slabs that can command the kind of capital to pay for this said card. I'll share. It's a teaser. We'll talk about it maybe next week when I finally get it and everything goes through. But a really great deal. I'll say ahead of time. Dealing with a tremendous collector, an amazing collector, a great person in the hobby. So I'm very excited about sharing that with everybody. But it's one of those things too where I'm sitting here going through with my head last night. Okay, what can I get? What am I going to have to move to pay for this? And it's painful. I think at some point it is painful. But if you're thinking about a card a lot going, this is one I probably would move, then that's the card you probably should move, because it's a card that's likely on your list, and it's going to be better in the end. I don't like having fewer cards. I'd love to have a lot more. The fact of the matter is the cards that I desire and want are just outside. I just cannot have everything I want and then need it too, of course. And have your cake and eat it too. So you have to make those tough decisions, because that's the smart way to do it. But ultimately, you're going to be the cards you end up with. You're hopeful that the value long term is going to outpace your investment. I've been keeping track of every dime I've spent the past 6 years. I have everything accounted for, everything I've sold, everything I've bought. I'm probably under right now about $5,000 or $6,000. I think that's about where I'm at. You know, conservatively, with conservative prices, a lot of the cards I haven't sold for a long time, so who knows what they're really valued at. But judging, I have like 5 or 6 cards in my collection that I feel like are going to do really, really well in the future and will make more than enough for any investments I've made. But that's kind of where I'm at. I feel like those are the cards that I want to see long term and have in my collection. Albeit fewer than I'd love to have, but you have to make those decisions. So you probably had we had a deal that made that deal possible. You had cards that you never thought you'd get rid of, but you have them now to make that deal possible. And I think you wouldn't trade it now. I mean, you'd be like, I'm happy to have this because the card I'm talking about, it's like I gotta get it, because if I don't, it's only going to be available privately. The last 2 sales of this card period are to the same person that I got it from. So I'm not getting this card anywhere else. There's only 7 copies graded, and there's only 24 copies that exist, and it's one of the most beautiful brands of cards ever produced, ever. So again, it's putting those types of cards together. It's a 90s card, big surprise, but I just think those cards of the players that we love from the era that we love are going to be the cards that matter, and they're going to matter to us most importantly, right? They're going to resonate with us. But I think there's going to be a great demand for cards like that, a Peyton Manning like that, numbered to 7. You got to just get that card. I mean, unless you're Spinatron, who has all of them, and it's good for him, but it's going to be really difficult to get into them. One of the things I was thinking about too is I threw up something. I was thinking about maybe putting a small little Craig Biggio collection together. He's a Houston Astro. It's kind of sacrilege for me as a Mariner fan to even consider an Astro. But obviously, growing up in the 80s, the 90s, we love Craig Biggio. He's amazing. For me, from a personal standpoint, he's a real devout Catholic man, and I've always studied him and always thought he was really cool. And I thought, I can probably afford to buy, not to see any value growth over time, because he's probably not going to be that guy. But I can get myself into a Central Credentials now of his, or maybe a Crusade Red out of 25, Donruss, or a Mirror Gold 96 Select Certified. I can get into some of these really, really cool cards from the 90s without breaking the bank, right? And it's almost like you would actually collect that player. You collect that player, not because there's going to be a future value, but then you can actually get and hold on to these really amazing cards that were created in that time, versus having to do all this liquidation, all this stuff for when you and I have to buy a Griffey or a Bonds. How expensive that is to do, because those are players that their cards are so valuable. Those particular cards are so valuable, and they're tucked away in collections, right? They're not coming out. It just there's 2 different ways of doing it. And then the beautiful part is you can do it any way you want. And what's exciting about one card and really appreciating a card in your collection, even if you have to filter down to get it, is that card is so meaningful now, right? And so there is something really cool about having to sacrifice to get something that's worth it to have. And knowing, holding it in your hand, that I'm not going to be able to get this card. I was not going to be able to. It was likely I wasn't going to be able to get this card unless all these things lined up and happened. and now I got it, and it's like that makes that card so irreplaceable. Like it's like the cornerstone of your PC. And the story about how you obtained it is really exciting and cool. It's very fascinating to listen to, but it also kind of resonates with a lot of us and getting that particular card. Now that card could be worth all kinds of different money. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be this real expensive card. Just getting that card, because maybe it could be of a player that's not as sought after, but you just don't know where the card is because it's not so sought after. There's hardly any of them out there, right? So going and finding it is almost as difficult as finding a bigger card of a bigger player. The chase, the excitement, the effort that goes into it is really cool. And I think that goes across the board for the hobby. That's what makes the hobby so fun, is getting that particular card. And it doesn't have to be a 90s card. It could be a vintage card. It could be a modern card. Just any card. The card that you really, really want that means something to you, and being able to get that said card, is really exciting. And it makes having less cards worth it, in my opinion. At least I'm telling myself that because I have to. But I never thought I would do this again, right? I never thought I'd have to push money together or push card capital together to get a big card. But it's like, I don't know. There's something exciting about that, and there's the sacrifice involved. So I don't know. I love your story. I think there's, we're not talking money, obviously, because we don't need to be talking the money piece of it. But it's just understanding that it's gonna cost something. You're gonna have to give up something you'd rather keep in order to get something that you have to have. Mm-hmm. If that's the best way to sum up what I just said. Summation. Getting rid of things you'd love to keep and want to keep to get something you have to have in your PC. And I think that's kind of the name in the game these days, because cards have gotten expensive. Mm-hmm. And we can't just go buy them anymore. It's a lot of these cards back in 2008 and 2009, 10, we could just buy them. We wouldn't have to worry about consolidating. We just go buy them. But you can't do that anymore. So if you want to collect some of these cards, you have to either you have great cash flow, a lot of disposable income, or you've built up a collection over the past 5 or 6 years that you can use as collateral to do that. Mm-hmm. So anyway, very cool stuff. I'm running up against 32 minutes. Anything else you want to add before we jump off?
Yeah, just one thing that I was thinking of as you're talking through that, in cards and what you're looking to acquire. And I think we talked this before. It's always nice knowing the other holders of the cards, right? So again, I mentioned these are numbered out of 7. There's only 4 copies that have ever been, revealed in the public. I know there's 5 total copies graded, so I don't know who has another copy that we haven't seen yet. But I feel comfortable holding this card at a significant value, knowing that Spinatron has 2 of them. Spinatron is not one of those guys who's going to wake up one day and just say, I think I'm going to send these to auction, right? Nope. Grant, Waldorf Stories, same situation. Guy has a unreal collection, awesome 90s collector. The only time he ever moves cards really is like in big trades. And so, certainly he sells cards and things like that, but he's also not the type of guy who's just going to say, I'm going to send this to Golden one day or send this to Fanatics or drop it on eBay. It just doesn't happen. And so I also think it's important as you get into bigger cards, you understand, the nature of other collectors that are holding those similar cards. So
got it. No, it makes tons of sense. Yeah, the community aspect of it. Like when I sealed this deal with this particular card I'm talking about, or this morning, it's like we were happy that it's going to go to me. He's happy it's going to me, and he was willing to do something a little different in order to get it into my hands. He knows it's other than an emergency, this is a card that's not going to ever move from my collection. So there's something about that that's really exciting and fun, and the community aspect of it. We're all basically sharing these cards with each other, right? And this person was made whole what they paid on it, so that makes them feel like they didn't lose anything, right? And a little bit more on top of that, just to do the right thing, right? You always want to try to take care of people too, and if we do that, we keep doing that and taking care of one another in the hobby, it'll blot out all the nefarious activity that goes on. We didn't even talk about the CT scanners. I feel like everybody's talked about it enough. There's no need for us to talk about it, but there's enough nefarious activity going on out there where it's remember and focus on all the stuff we're talking about today, because it's all the positive stuff. It's all the wonderful things. It's about us working together. And at the end of the day, you get some of these cars in your collection, people say, wow, that's the good news is in any emergency event, I at least feel very confident that, and I have buyers for most of my cards, I would be fine. Like, I would easily be able to move these cards and the cash would be right there. I mean, that tells you what you have in your hands. Like, you would be able to sell your card, no problem. And you probably have a handful of cards in your collection that would make up for everything. And there's buyers, and there's people that would covet that card. That's a cool feeling too. Not everybody has that feeling, of course, but that's a cool feeling. And I feel good about that. That helps me sleep at night with the collection I have, is knowing that they're good cards, or they're quality cards, and they matter to me and they matter to other people. More importantly, we all work together to make sure we, like, again, we didn't even talk about what Cardboard Hero, I think it was, Cardboard Preacher, his little story that he ran, helping. I think he's a local guy. He's over here at Eastern Washington University, so I'm over here in Seattle. So I think that the family's in Spokane, so it's close to home for me. I know I gave there as well. It's that, yeah, and I think what a wonderful thing. Our hobby, between that story and how wonderful that was, and what we're talking about today, and we're working with other collectors and knowing who own cards and looking out for one another, man, we got to just continue talking about stuff like this, because that's what's great about our hobby, right? We're looking out for one another, looking out for other people. We got to keep that positive vibe going. And yeah, very happy to hear that the National seems like it was a big success. It was very busy. Sounds like it's good. It's going back to Chicago from what I've heard. But nonetheless, the hobby's still very much alive and well, and kicking. And it's not just existing on Instagram or YouTube. So that's exciting to hear. Thank you, Drake, for sharing your story and sharing your experience with everybody that was not able to make it. So anyway, you guys comment below. We talked about a lot of things, but if you have an experience from the National, and you went to the National and you're listening to us today, tell us your story. Throw it down in the comment section. I'd love to read about it. I'd love to hear everybody's experiences and what they've, it doesn't have to be a novel, but just give us a quick summary of what you experienced. You pick up a really cool card or anything like that. Let's talk about that. Let's have some fun discussion, and appreciate everybody kind of giving me the heads up about the Bonds and Griffey. Ironically, that Griffey's heading to auction now because I have to pay for this card. So I have neither of those, but it's still a really cool card, and I'm hopeful that it can go to another great home, share it with somebody else. And yeah, everybody have a great week. Hope you're enjoying your summer. Stay safe. Continue collecting and be kind to one another, and we'll talk to you on the other side.
See you next time.